Hello, this is Paul Slauson. I have my headphones in for better audio quality, hopefully. So I'm the doctoral student. I'm one of the doctoral students for DOC 7300, the Action Research class. So I wanted to start off everything with talking about that this is a hypothetical research that I did. I didn't get to have time to actually do it, so a lot of this will be what would have happened if we actually did this whole research. However, when I get to the actual displaying the results, I'm going to use very similar studies that would reflect what we would expect to see in this research. So the whole thing that I was going to explore is carb timing and exercise performance in powerlifters. Essentially, if they introduce carbs before they train, do we see an increase in exercise performance in their training programs? So the entire kind of idea came from the point of just seeing powerlifters not really explore nutrition that well, but I do see them really intaking a whole lot of carbs in competitions. So it's kind of like, if you're doing so well in competitions in carb loading, essentially, how can we transfer this to training, essentially? So that's really what we're looking at, and hopefully to drive the force that nutrition is really important, and being able to get that down and zero it down can actually help you with being able to train better. So again, the main objective is to find out if carbs eaten before training would increase performance, and if possible, we'll find out if there's any improvements to be observed. And we're going to look at qualitative data and quantitative, like what I would use for each approach. And then we're going to keep all the steps ethical, so we'll go through a lot of the ethical problems or dilemmas that could occur at each step here. So first is qualitative. So how are we going to get qualitative data? So I decided to use the rate of perceived exertion, RPE, scale. That way we can measure how athletes feel during the whole process. And we would get that the first week or the second week, kind of see how that goes. The first week may be filled with screening and guided interviews to see about collecting informed consent. So with this RPE scale, we're going to find out how they feel during training before carbs is introduced into the initiative. We would make sure that everyone has a similar training program scheduling, so that way it's kind of clear across the board. We're all doing the same kind of exercise. For example, if we're going to do squat and deadlift with accessory workouts, accessory as in like bicep curls or things like that, what they call accessory workouts, which is anything not in the squat, bench, deadlift category, essentially. And then we would take it again, the RPs, after carbs is introduced, to see if that same exercise they did feels easier or the same or worse or whatever. Data collection will be done by myself and stakeholders. And this is kind of where ethical dilemmas come in, where we want to make sure that data collection is accurate, so that way we don't get any discrepancies, and that can be mitigated by training stakeholders to collect data, and also making data collection easier by making it digital, and also kind of having a template there where they just have to fill out the data. That way, this also can help me centralize all the data and then make it easy to keep confidentiality maintained by changing the participants' names and identifying information. So that's how we would do qualitative, as well as adding any remarks or personal things the athletes have. Quantitative would be a 1 rep max test. That's what I think would be the best to really measure. It may be kind of inexpensive as well, but the big thing is that powerlifters would be familiar with this kind of thing, as they probably do this quite often, testing their max. I wouldn't say as often as every week, but I would say often enough where they know how it works. Essentially, we would have an initial testing, and it would be probably like a bench press. I would say a bench press and then we would have the stakeholders administer this test as well as me, and also have the stakeholders, like their coaches, walk them through the warm-up and stretch sequence, because they will know their athlete better, and they'll know kind of what works best to get them ready, so that safety is always at the forefront. Then we would take it again after carbs is introduced into the whole mix to see if there's any improvements there. So the big thing is ethical considerations like power imbalances or bias. If we have the coaches or the stakeholders administering this test, we want to make sure that it's honest and it's accurate. Because if we have the coaches, believe that carbs do help, and they're trying to, make an example for their athletes, maybe they'll have a 1-rep max test that isn't truly representative of their maximum strength. So we don't want that. So we'll have to reinforce to the stakeholders that this is not a time or a place to kind of want to set an example of anything. We want to have a true and credible result to demonstrate if carbohydrates have any sort of effect on exercise performance. So key findings. So what we're going to do is I'm going to talk about a couple studies that did essentially this, what I wanted to do. So because it's hypothetical, what we're going to do is go into Wax et al. These people did something very similar. So what they did was they took some trained athletes, male and female, and they had them ingest carbs into their nutrition. They had carbs before their intervention, which was a single leg extension machine that measured power output in newtons. And they also looked at time to exhaustion by using minutes for that. They had a placebo group, PL, and they had an experiment group they named CHO for carbs. What they did was they had the experimental group ingest 0.17 grams per kilogram of body weight, and the placebo had aspartame or aspartame, the artificial sweetener that tastes sweet but isn't carbs, essentially not calories. So what they found was the experimental group experienced an increase in both force output and time to exhaustion, which we would expect similar results, hopefully. So to illustrate this further, I took this from the study, and here's the appropriate citations so I don't get in trouble. But as you can see here, the placebo effect, they're generating about 3,500 newtons, whereas the experimental group is almost at 5,000, with the outliers shown there, with the placebo effect outlier still not being as high as the carb one. Time to exhaustion also is a big difference, with 15 minutes for the placebo to almost 30, which is almost double what the experimental group has. So we can see that there's a huge difference in the two groups because carbs were introduced to this. So it's really amazing to see, and we would expect similar results in my experiment. Now, a little quick addition is, again, Wax et al. This is another one that they did about carbs again. However, this was for elite athletes, and the only difference between the two was they didn't check or look at time to exhaustion. It was only force output in newtons. And again, it was the same dosage of carbs per kilogram. It was also the same like aspartame, aspartame for the placebo. So again, just to demonstrate, this is what they found again. So we could see the placebo is between 5 and 10,000, let's say 7,000, and we have a huge jump in the experimental group that had ingested the actual carbs, with the p-score being less than 0.05. So this is a huge difference and a demonstration that perhaps elite athletes may experience a bigger increase than just trained individuals, but that's kind of room for future research, I think. So some ethical considerations and limitations. So for my hypothetical research, there's a lot of ethical considerations we explored, but just to review, confidentiality is one of them. And by how to mitigate that would be to have, again, the data collected in the central area and make sure that all the identifying information is gone. So when that data is shared with the stakeholders, it won't accidentally show who the participants are. This may also kind of mitigate power imbalances also. Informed consent, which is very important in all the research, could be obtained through the screening and guided interview process. With that guided interview being more of, do you already do these kind of carb and nutrition habits? Do you have a coach? Things like that. That is something that could be done to add on to the qualitative data. The other thing is data collection accuracy, and again, this could be addressed by the training of the stakeholders. And above all, having frequent checkpoints to meet with the stakeholders to give feedback to them as well as feedback to me of how things are going is highly important. And this is a good time to have an ethical check, an ethical checkpoint. So that would be a good time to do that. Some limitations, there's going to be probably quite a few. One thing that I believe is sample size. There's a few powerlifting gyms around, so maybe not too bad. But we might have a poor sample size for female athletes. There may not be too many. And I think a big limitation is the amount of coaches and stakeholders, because to be honest, a lot of powerlifters don't have any coaches or coaches that would be stakeholders. So we may have to alternate that route by maybe including other people like kinesiologists or other people that are familiar with the sport. Maybe other powerlifters that don't want to participate as a participant but would like to give feedback. So that would be some limitations here as well. So those are some of the things that we may find. And I'll address this later, but just to mention as well, one limitation is the type of carb that we're giving to the participants, which would be room for new and additional research. Some recommendations. Here's a picture of some bread, so you know we're talking about carbs still. So recommendations would be, so after reviewing 2 studies, and I picked these 2 because they're the most closely related to my research, because they involved weightlifters, not specifically powerlifters, but still. We can recommend that having carbs or using carbs as a way to increase your exercise performance would be a great recommendation to actually delve into having a structured nutrition plan. And again, just kind of like being able to reinforce this is to be able to use this data to educate powerlifters on how much of a performance gain you can experience. If we showed that graph and showed your force in newtons that you can generate almost doubles, depending, that might help them understand just how important it is to have a proper diet. This can also go to coaches as well, so they can use this data as well. And then just being mindful of what works best with the athletes. So we didn't really get to nail down the exact timing of the carbs. We just know beforehand actually gives you some sort of benefit. But being mindful of what works best for that specific person. It could be an hour before, 30 minutes before, 2 hours before. It really kind of depends on a lot of factors. So that's kind of some recommendations that we have there. And then to conclude how everything went. So again, we kind of highlighted how carbs can help increase exercise performance experiences and how that should be recommended to athletes, to powerlifters. Again, that limitations are present there, and to be transparent, again, we didn't get to perform this, but actual carbs and specific ones would be next steps there as well. And also, we kind of learned that action research is cyclical, so as we come out of this research, we can find that we launch another action research talking about specific carbs, or we're launching specific timing and start that action research if we find that the outcomes may not have too many big differences. But the big thing too that I wanted to say here that's not listed is that the amount of time that I was planning to do this research was 5 weeks, which could be maybe too short because those 1-rep max tests are rigorous, but also it was trying to mitigate the natural strength gains of just training for a long period of time. So if we did a 12-week program and we did a 1-rep max from week 1 to 12, we can't really solidly conclude that the carbs was the reason why there was increases if there were present there. We can say, well, it's been 12 weeks. That's a lot of time of training, and it could be just you got stronger because you had a good training program, regardless of what you did with your carbs. So that's a limitation, and that's something to explore, is the duration changes. So that's what we have there. For the sake of time, that'll be all I'll mention. But here's the references that I used here, and thank you for watching.